Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public session of the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Halton District School Board for March 20th, 2024. Please be advised that the meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed on hdsb.ca and on the HDSB YouTube channel. We'll start with a roll call. Trustee Bryden?
Here.
Trustee Rocha?
Here.
Trustee Baxter?
Here.
Trustee Amos?
Good evening.
Chair Collard?
I'm here.
Trustee Shuttleworth?
Hi.
And Trustee Gray?
Hello.
Thank you. We have regrets from Trustee Daniele, and we believe Trustee Zhang and Ahmed will be joining us later.
Trustee Zhang will not be attending. He's away.
Okay. Regrets from Trustee Zhang. Thank you. Director Annis, could you please note which staff are in attendance tonight?
Thank you and good evening. We have the contingent of staff that supports the agenda items tonight at the Committee of the Whole, so thank you.
Thank you. Tonight, I will be honoring the land. We begin by acknowledging the land and our responsibility to care for and respect all that provides us with life. This land upon which HDSB is situated is on the ancestral, treaty, and tidal lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Michisaji Nation, now known as the Mississaugas of the Credit. Mississauga territory is in the past and present continues to host both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. The HDSB is committed to continuous knowledge building with respect to actions that address and resolve the ongoing impacts of colonialism. We do this by learning and understanding the true history, treaty obligations, duties and responsibilities, and Indigenous rights while actively maintaining mutually beneficial relationships and collectively respecting and caring for the land. We will move on to the approval of the agenda. Trustee Shuttleworth, would you like to move a motion to approve the agenda?
Sure.
Are there any objections? Seeing none, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. In relation to our agenda this evening, are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item 2.0. We have two presentations. The first is by the Executive Director, Mark Clare, from Halton Learning Foundation. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, thank you. Wonderful to see so many friendly faces here today. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about HLF and specifically HLF month, which is coming up in the month of April. So I have control of things here. I can't quite see. That one? Yep. Excellent. Whew, good thing for technical support. All right. So I know you folks are very familiar with what we do, but I do want to provide a few little highlights and updates to some of our program areas, and for the benefit of the folks that may be joining online as well, just a quick real overcap of what we do as an organization. So we were started by the school board in the late 90s into the early 2000s, and received our charitable status in 2004. And so essentially we are independent from the school board, but support our sole purpose is to support students within the Halton District School Board. So we raise funds to eliminate financial barriers to learning. We support equity, inclusion, and we do that in 3 ways. So supporting financial support for students in need. Our school grants, so schools can submit an application to the Halton Learning Foundation. This year it was up to $1,200 to support projects that align with the school board's multi-year strategic plan. Mental health, equity inclusion, Indigenous awareness, and then learning achievement are the 4 ones that we support. We also have over 55 scholarships this year that are available for students who are graduating from HDSB schools. And so I encourage people that if you are graduating, please have a look at our website, check those out. Some are very school specific, but there are other ones that are looking at different program areas that people are getting into, etc. So please check that out. All right, just a quick update on our eliminating barriers. Oh, of course, the values are not there, but that's okay. I'll talk to you about it. So last school year, we helped just over 2,000 students, which is a 40% increase over the previous year. This year, we are at 1,960 students so far this year. So that is about 500 students ahead of where we were the same time last year. So an enormous need, as you can imagine, if you've been listening to the news, reading the news, lots of people are really challenged with the cost of living, inflation, paying for food, rent. All of those are really challenging for people these days. So we're seeing that reflected in the numbers that we're seeing. A real quick impact story there for you. You know, I had the privilege of joining the Student Senate meeting that happened last night. And one of the presenters, a young lady, came forward and said, I actually am currently receiving assistance through Halton Learning Foundation. She's doing a co-op placement in Hamilton, and so the transportation to that placement is a challenge for her family. And so she's receiving some support through Halton Learning Foundation so that she can participate in that really valuable learning opportunity. And she was so grateful. I had a chance to speak with her during one of the breaks, and I said, you know, thank you for letting us know, and you know, commented on how brave she was and coming forward and sharing that information. And so you know, that just emphasizes that these, you know, we are helping, we're putting a face to the help that we're providing. And so I thought that was a wonderful that she did that for us. Our vision is to help HDSB students with financial support to realize their potential. And we are, I mean, this whole school board, all the people involved in the school board are helping students realize their potential. Halton Learning Foundation's role in that is more on the financial support when there are financial barriers to that learning success. And so, you know, that potential can mean all sorts of things. It could be, you know, learning and studying new things. It could mean growing as a new person, getting proper nutrition, being part of a community. Lots of different ways that potential can mean to students. And so, again, I know that the folks in this particular room are aware of how HLF is funded, but for the information of the people that might be watching at home, we rely on the generosity of the community. You know, donations through corporations, service clubs, community foundations, individuals, third-party fundraisers. You know, we don't receive any direct funding through the ministry or from the school board. We do receive all sorts of wonderful support through the school board, our office space, you know, connection with communications people here, connections with the folks that are in this room. It's highly valued from us at the Halton Learning Foundation. So thank you for that. But we do rely on the generosity of the community through donations and financial support. As many of you in the room know, the HDSB has designated April as HLF month. which is we're really excited about. And essentially we are asking school communities and the broader Halton community to do some sort of initiative to support HLF during the month. Maybe it's where, some sort of challenge, walking challenge, or, how many books can you read kind of challenge. Maybe it's a wear your favorite hat day or chocolate or treat sales of some sort. It's open to the school community to choose what would be suitable and when it would be suitable. The student trustees and the student senate have been just extraordinary with their support of HLF month, and so thank you to them. Last night it was front and center in our not only our presentation but in several other parts of the evening as well for the student senate meeting that happened yesterday. So thank you to those folks. This is an opportunity for people to make a donation. We also have what we call a peer-to-peer portal. And so think walkathon, where people can create a team, they can join a team, they can ask their friends and family to sponsor them for a walking challenge or whatever that happens to be. I do want to highlight that we have a sponsor for HLF month, and it happens to be CN Rail. And so a part of that sponsorship is that they are going to be matching donations up to $25,000, which is amazing. And so very, very thankful to CN for that. I personally am going to participate in a personal challenge. I'm calling it the Tour de Halton. So I like to ride my bike. And my goal is I'm going to start up in Acton. Yay. Ride to Georgetown, Milton, Oakville, and then Burlington. And it'll be about 100 kilometers, roughly. I'd like to visit some schools along the way as well. And, just to help create awareness and, raise some funds. So my personal goal is to, for my challenge is to help 20 students at $250 per student is typically how we would support students. So that's, I'm hoping to raise $5,000 as part of my own personal challenge. So I just mentioned that as a way of, getting your thoughts going on some potential ways that you might get involved with HLF month. And we would love your support there. This is what the portal looks like. So people can come into this page directly and make a donation directly, or they could create a team, they could join a team, they could donate to an individual, they could donate to a team. There's all sorts of great options on this particular portal. It's really easy to use. If this is of interest for you to learn more about this, then please come talk to me or contact me, and I'd be happy to walk you through that. It's not a problem. Students in the Spotlight. So 2 years ago, we had a virtual Students in the Spotlight event, an opportunity to highlight the many talented students that are within the Halton District School Board. And so we are bringing that back as part of HLF month. It's a culminating event on April 23rd. So please, make sure that's in your calendar. It'll be at Dr. Frank J. Hayden Secondary School. The folks there have been very wonderful in helping us with this. Students, HDSB students, are invited to submit a video audition. And we've had a number of students already submit auditions. It could be somebody playing an instrument. It could be somebody singing. We have some people that are a dance group. 2 years ago, we had a young person who did a comedy act. So, I mean, think of whatever could be sort of shared on a live stage would be welcome to do that. So the deadline was originally today. We have extended that to Monday, March 25th. So a few more days for people to submit auditions. Those people will be notified by April 2nd on whether they will be included as part of the live show on April 23rd. Tickets are on sale for the event as well, so please visit our website and you can see some of that information there. It's going to be an amazing event, and we'd love to see you all there. Yes?
Just checking, they're video auditions, but then they're live that evening.
Right, yes. So the video auditions allow us to see the auditions and see what might be suitable. We may not be able to take all of the auditions because we only have room for maybe 15 or maybe 20 spots on stage. So that's why we're doing the audition process. So thank you. Any other questions on that? Wonderful. As part of HLF Month, we have received permission to do a HLF Month launch and flag racing here on Wednesday, April 3rd. It'll start out in the with a bit of a mix and mingle with some light refreshments in the staff lounge and kitchen here at the JWS Education Center. Start of the formal remarks will be at 5:15. Again, inside. And then once those formal marks are finished, we'll move out to the flag pole area. We'll do a photo op, as we do with these types of things, and then raise the HLF Month flag. And then the ceremony will finish shortly thereafter. So, and I recognize that the timing of this is not coincidental with your planned trustee meeting on the 3rd. So we wanted to make sure that people would probably be here anyway. So a great opportunity to participate in that. So if you haven't done so already, if you could please RSVP to myself. Trustee Collard will be saying some remarks. Associate Director Salmini will be saying some remarks. Director Ennis is not available that day. Our chair of our board of directors will be saying some remarks as well. The student trustees will be doing a land acknowledgement as part of those remarks as well. So we're really excited about this, and we'd love for you all to be there as well. So why does it matter? Why does it matter to have something like HLF Month? So we know that poverty does remain a powerful factor in whether a student succeeds in school. And we have seen an extraordinary increase in that need, essentially 35% over the same time last year. And we know that HLF is having an enormous impact on students who have those financial barriers to learning success. And an initiative like HLF Month is going to help us to continue to say yes to HDSB students so that they can overcome some of those financial barriers to learning. So we would appreciate the community support. The school board has already been very supportive, and we very much appreciate that. And we invite the Halton community, the school community, and the broader community to get involved with HLF Month to help us to continue to say yes to HDSB students. Any questions or comments to what I've shared?
Can you please buzz in on the speakers list if you want to make a comment?
Jean, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mark, I just wanted to know how students would be aware of the date and timeline and what's required to participate in the student talent night. Mm-hmm. How did that information get disseminated?
Yep. So we have sent it out in a variety of different areas. So we have some school contacts ourselves. So people that have been requesting or submitting applications for student support, they have received. We have sent it out to all the schools at the admin level. We have had disseminated information through the Student Senate as well. And Director Ennis also sent out an email specifically to students at a secondary level as well. As part of that communication. In my presentations to the administration folks over the past couple of months, so the Halton Secondary Principal Association, Halton Elementary Principal Association, as part of the HLF Month presentation I shared with them, Students in the Spotlight, it was included as part of that as well. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I know that I've said this every time I attend the board meeting for HLF, that I don't visit a single school where HLF is not mentioned as a supporter for our students. So I just want to express my sincere thanks on behalf of everyone. You're doing tremendous work. And I love, in particular, the abundance mindset that you have as the executive director and the leadership of the board, that, you know, you will expand the goal to meet the needs, rather than limit the goal to the needs. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Director Ennis, and we very much appreciate your support. And Director Ennis has done already done something to sort of highlight HLF, and has agreed to do another short video to support HLF Month. So thank you to you, Director Ennis, as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Mark, for this presentation. And we wish you all the very best as you plan and embark on this very exciting and important month of April being Halton Learning Foundation Month. I know our students, our student trustees and the Senate are very excited and working hard to create plans for their own schools to share the message and get students involved in fundraising and supporting their fellow students through that. So all the best to you. Enjoy your bike ride, and I'm sure the students will be happy to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, and we'll move on to our second presentation, and that's Superintendent Nagoy.
All right. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for having us this evening. Jay Chantabang, the General Manager of Financial Planning, and myself would like to walk you through an update on budget planning, as well as a list of savings, reductions, efficiencies, proposed additions, the proposed plan for an in-year deficit elimination, as well as keeping in mind that all of this is, at this point, based on information that we have available and subject to change, as we're still looking to hear what we've disseminated from the budget survey, which is coming to the board on April 3rd. So as I mentioned, and this did not turn pretty well in PDF, but we are well underway in our budgeting process. We are providing updates to the board at this point, so between February and May, as information becomes available, with the next key dates being April 3rd for budget survey information. And if the grants are released in time, we would have an update on that. May 7th, we will go to the Special Education Advisory Committee with an update. And then we are hoping in May to come back to the Committee of the Whole with a draft budget, which will be approved at the board meeting in June. In terms of the current state, as trustees are well aware, and we've had discussions before, there's a new regulatory requirement to balance the budget. In the past, a compliant budget allowed school boards with an accumulated surplus to spend up to 1% of their provincial allocation by dipping into the reserves. And our school board still has a significant accumulated reserve. However, the new regulation requires us to balance the budget with no wiggle room unless we receive ministry approval. In the current year, we have a 7.7 million, and this time it is a structural deficit. Year over year, we did decide, and the Board of Trustees has decided to use the accumulated surplus to complement the services and supports to students. And we did that with a long-term view and intentionally. However, a number of changes in the funding model and trends in terms of cost pressures and inflation has turned out that the current year deficit is a structural deficit. So we are looking to eliminate it, and we're looking at everything in our budget. We're looking at the mandated staffing ratios as well as all the other staffing. We were looking for any duplication of services where we can do things differently with less. Review of the viability of all of our programs, school bus transportation, as well as all of our operating budgets. So what we will see in the next few slides, we have to take into account, based on the information we have currently, and keep in mind we do not have our revenues, which is the half of the puzzle. So all we know is sort of where we are today, what are the pressures for next year, and what can we anticipate. So we have to take into account what we think will happen to those grants next year. One of the areas that will negatively impact our funding will be a projected decline in enrollment, which is in both panels. So less students, less funding. On one side, that also means less staffing that we need to mandated class ratio or staffing that is related to a particular ratio. We are looking at a decline in interest rates, and since we do have a strong financial position and cash flow, we do rely on investment income to be able to balance the budget and do different things because that is one of the very few areas of funding that is not prescribed by the ministry. We are looking at additional areas that do require investment, even in an year when we're looking at reductions and austerity measures. There's still priorities as we're looking at our corporate risk profile that we still have to address. And in order not to look at reductions too far, we are also reviewing the trend of savings between the budget cycle and the end of the year. We don't always use all of the budget through the year. We're always diligent and trying to be as efficient as possible. So there is a trend over the last number of years, approximately, that is a $2 million that we see in savings between the budget cycle and the year end. So when we look at all of those factors together and eliminating the deficit, we are looking at an actual reduction of 10.3 million and additions of 1.3 million and change, as well as a priority to maintain our current EA complement, which would be about 1.5 million in absence of the information of whether or not that one-time funding that is related to collective agreements will continue. We have discussed this at the January Committee of the Whole, which was direction from the board in terms of how do we go about the budget next year. One, which would require only board approval, is to be a compliant budget will be a balanced budget. But that means that even if we have one-time pressures, we would have to find long-term or permanent reductions to make room for something like that. So the second option is to address our accumulated surplus. It's financially and fiscally responsible, but to ask ministry's approval for those items that are one-time in nature, because we do have the accumulated surplus and we would not want to impact our system any further than we have to. And the trustees have agreed with the second option, and we are providing the ministry early on with this direction and with the request that we're going to be looking for approval for those items. So this slide is just a bit of an update in terms of our stakeholder feedback, which has closed at about 3,400 responses. We are currently going through that data and we'll bring it to the board on April the 3rd. And we had already some very helpful and informative sessions with the Special Education Advisory Committee, the Parent Involvement Committee, and staffing sessions, which were back in February. And we'll continue the discussion as well as you've seen coming up in April and May. We'll go back to SEAC and staff as well as we have more information. So enrollment, you've heard me say we are looking at a declining enrollment. So this slide has been updated based on our second and third projections for where we think March 31st will be, which will be the base for the projection for next year's funding, next year's enrollment. So we're looking at a reduction from the current revised estimates enrollment of 181 students, so less, 181 students in the elementary panel, and about 90 students less in the secondary panel. And that is a lot of that is large cohorts graduating and are replaced by smaller grades. So in terms of how we are looking to identify savings and efficiencies, the priority has been to minimize the impact on the system, to provide the programming and the support, the level of support that we have been in the past to the extent possible. So this slide identifies a lot of it is looking at our staffing and the mandated class size, where we have in the past as a growth board been able to be more flexible and provide lower class sizes than mandated, provide additional sections. So we are looking at all of that, and we are going to be very efficient with our class sizes, both at the elementary and secondary panel. We have looked at program viability. So there's a couple of programs that we are proposing to close. That's the LEAP program and the Behavior Resource Class program. And that is based on the students will be retained within their in-boundary school, and the resources are available to them to support their growth at that school. And we're also looking at the enrollment, viability, and sizing of self-contained classes for both panels. Central teaching supports, e-learning and shift positions have also been identified as potential savings, as well as looking at child youth counselors and the mental health strategy that has been funded in the last couple of years through reserves. Other areas, we're looking at the school admin staffing and reallocation in order to minimize impact from those. That group in particular also lost their SSF funding, which was support for student funding tied to collective agreements. And some one-time items that we've seen in our budgets that make up the rest of those items. So I'm not sure if there's a speakers list. Maybe I'll pause here.
Yes, there are two speakers. First, Chair Collard.
Thank you very much. I'm specifically looking at the special education line there. That's a huge number of staff reduction there. I don't even know where to begin with that. I was a long-time SEAC member, and I know that when we look at a number like that of reduction, it's kind of scary, and we always struggle to have sufficient funding for our spec ed programs. I'm wondering if you could please let me know how many students are impacted by this and what we're doing. And I know that Superintendent Ruddock is not here.
She's here. She's online.
Oh, she is here? She's online. Okay. If we could please have some kind of understanding of how those students' needs are going to be met, because that's a dramatic loss of staffing in that particular line item? Thanks.
I'm going to ask Superintendent Rada, please go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the question. I do want to say that our focus has been finding efficiencies and maintaining our service. So I don't want it to be positioned or for you to think that that because there's a reduction in teachers that we're reducing our service, and quite the opposite. And I'm happy to kind of walk through what I mean by that in each scenario. So in our community pathway program, we have traditionally staffed our classes at either a 1-to-10 ratio or a 1-to-12. We are now staffing it on an average of 1-to-12, even though the ministry funds us at a 1-to-16 ratio. So we still are staffing our classes below the ministry mandate. And that's resulted in a reduction of 8 FTE over the 7 CPP sites. But all of those students continue to be in the program and will be served by all of the supports in that program. For our self-contained learning disability classes, we have adjusted the staffing ratio to 1-to-10, previously 1-to-8. Again, the ministry funds that at 1-to-16, so well below the ministry mandate again. And that coupled with a real drop in demand for the classes, we have far fewer students requesting self-contained placements, and I am surmising that that's as a result of the implementation of a structured literacy model in all of our schools, that our special education resource teachers are delivering Tier 3 targeted structured reading intervention in the homeschool. And so that, coupled with the class size, is 12 LD classes that are closing, but every student that is seeking an LD placement will have an LD placement. We are closing the self-contained gifted sites in Halton Hills. Those were very under-enrolled, operating at about 30% capacity, but those students have been offered a spot in the Milton self-contained program. And then I believe I've spoken already about the structured reading IRTs. That team is folding because we have trained every CERT in every school to deliver that service. But we do have in the budget an ask for an instructional program leader and coaches to further the fidelity of implementation and support our CERTs delivering the service to students. So you can see that we've really looked at efficiencies, maintaining the service, and making sure that our students are still getting the supports that they need, whether it's in the homeschool or within the regular or within the self-contained environment.
Thanks very much for that, Superintendent Ruddock.
Okay, Margot.
Thanks, Jonna. So my question kind of builds on what Amy just asked, and it's Colette kind of hinted at it. When I'm looking at the idea that you are lessening central teaching supports, e-learning, and shift coaches, and so I think about the impact. Colette spoke to how they're having coaches come in to ensure that EAs are trained, and that sort of thing is that ripple effect that to me gives you more for less, because you've got one person who's going out and elbow partnering and working with teachers to give them the skills to do that work. So, and again, I'm looking at that in relation to the class closures that are happening. So how does that find efficiencies if when we have coaches, they are creating, in what I think of, is they are creating experts within their what's already there. So they're giving the skills to people, so building the capacity of our staff. So I'm just trying to figure out how that's an efficiency, just in the mindset of, do you see what I mean? Like, it's a learning model. That if they're out there giving skills to people, then you're not having to find new people to come in to do those jobs because they're already there. They're already there with the information that you've given them from the coaches that you have.
Absolutely.
Did you want me to speak to that?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, sure. And even though the shift coaches weren't within special education, I know that Superintendent Frankovich really looked at where is there a duplication of service And we already have instructional program leaders within subject-specific areas in the school programs department that is out in our schools coaching our staff. And so when we look at what services can be delivered, in terms of an important resource, but accessing supports that we already have, that's where we found a duplication of service, and that's why we've reduced the shift coaches, but maintained the instructional program leaders to continue to coach around innovation and this subject-specific areas.
Thanks, Colette. But my question wasn't only specifically for it's just for that whole idea of central supports that would ripple out into the school. So not necessarily specifically for shift, but for everything. So as you said, Colette, you were talking about how you are closing classrooms, but these teachers are going in I can't remember what you called them. We're going into the classes to train the CERTs and the EAs to be able to do that work. So I'm just wondering, by getting rid of that central support network that's going in to train and build up our existing staff to have those skills, will we not then need to find new people to fill those gaps of those skills that are missing?
So thanks, Barbara. Sorry that I misunderstood that question. So our structured reading IRTs currently are providing direct support to students, because that was in the absence of our CERTs not having the training and the resources to do it themselves. So while we've had the IRTs delivering direct service to students, we have also built up the skill set of our CERTs, purchased resources for every CERT, so now they can deliver that service, and that's why we're shifting and reducing from 8 IRTs providing service to students to a team of 4 using the coaching model. I hope I answered that question this time. Sorry, Margaret.
Yeah, no. But it's so again, Colette, what you're telling me is what I'm wanting to know about generally as well. So you've answered it for your area, but I'm just asking there. I see Roxana going, I can tell you. So yeah. Thanks, Colette.
So just further to that, and Colette has mentioned the subject-specific IPLs, which we are proposing to actually increase, not decrease. Some of the central staffing positions that we are proposing to decrease are as a result of the fact that through collective agreement, there was confirmation of continuation of the IRTs. So that was about 17 staff that are being continued through that funding model. So we're able to balance the level of service between the funding model that has been confirmed to continue through this new collective agreement with the base staff that we are proposing to reduce.
Thank you. Sorry, I was confusing.
Okay, Jean.
Yes, thank you. I wonder if under other areas on the chart, if we could have some understanding of school admin support, 8 positions. I'm not sure what that looks like.
Absolutely. So we are looking at the model of allocating the secretarial or administrative support in schools. And reallocating in order to find some efficiencies. As well, we have to take into account that there were 8 positions that are no longer funded through the support for student funding that was part of the prior collective agreement. It was continued 1 year until they finalized their central agreement for this particular round, but it's no longer continuing. So we're trying to say, okay, we're losing funding for these positions. Which positions, equivalent positions, are we looking to reduce?
Thank you. And am I correct in thinking that those positions are triggered by enrollment?
It is a staffing ratio for schools, but a staffing ratio is within management's control. And I think Superintendent Taha may be able to speak to it a bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Roxana, through you, Madam Vice Chair, to Trustee Gray. The school admin support that we're looking at, that number 8.0 FTE will also happen through attrition. So it'll be a phased out approach. It won't be happening instantly. But again, yeah, the allocations are driven by enrollment. As enrollment goes up and down, your allocations will go up and down. But as an overall review of this model, if we are to fine tune it, that fine tunage up to 8 FTEs will happen through attrition, if it happens. So I want to make sure that point is captured. The attrition is a key here.
Okay, Carol.
Thank you. I think this kind of follows on the question that Margot was asking. When I'm looking through the list and listening to the explanations of which, what all of these savings mean, I'm sort of in my mind thinking in terms of student experience and impact on students versus something that is a savings naturally. And I'm wondering if there's a way to sort of break this up to help us as trustees explain to families and the public what the impact on students would be. And just as an example, so we're hearing from Superintendent Ruddick, for instance, that there's a change in special education that is an overall benefit to students in the way that the program's being offered. So it's not that students are getting less or that we're unable to provide what we want to do. It's that the program's changing in a way that is perceived as better. Versus something like the right to read resources. I'm assuming that $400,000 was never intended to be spent again next year. It was a one-time purchase. So those things just, they seem a little bit different. And then when you look at child and youth counselors, to me, that seems like a cut, right? Like that's too fewer people in our system to support our students. So from the way I'm looking at it, I see a big difference between, cutting 2 child and youth counselors versus not spending money that we never meant to spend anyway. And I understand how you have to come up with the 10 million, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to cut this chart into 2 pieces that tells the story a little bit better so that when I'm asked what's the impact on students, it's a little bit easier to illustrate. Sorry, that was a long question. Thank you.
And absolutely, we can provide more background, but also, and you mentioned the entire philosophy in looking at this was to minimize the impact on the system. When we're looking at child and youth counselors, we have to look at reduction in enrollment, especially at the elementary panel over the last couple of years as well. So that has something to do with it, but also the fact that social workers are working more and more with our, I think it's grade 7 and 8 as well. So there's a shift in workload and focus. So we are actually asking to add a social worker or reduce to CYC. So it's not a reduction in service. That was not the purpose. It's more of a shift in service. That has been pretty much the focus when we were looking at all of these proposed reductions, is to see how do we do things differently but still offer the services that the students have been accustomed to, just being tailored to their needs.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you. Robbie.
Thank you. When we're looking at kindergarten staffing resizing, do we have a sense of what that will mean in terms of our current average class size and our projected average class size, and perhaps as importantly, in the regs, the limit for classes is 29, except in special circumstances where it can go up to 32. And 32 kids in a kindergarten class is challenging. And do we have any sense of whether we will ever go past that 29, and whether we might be looking at 30 plus kids in a class?
Perhaps I'll start and we'll see if Superintendent, not as formal committee, would like to add. So in terms of class size, what we have done as a growth board has worked really well over the past few years, but we're now in a bit of a decline and new territory. We had purposely staffed them at around 23. And then as we had students come in after, they would just build them a little bit. What we find when we have a declining enrollment is that we're stuck with 23, but we don't get funded there. So we're going to be very efficient in how we fund them, the ratio in particular. So we're looking at, 27, 28, leaving a bit of room if there are a couple of students that will be coming, then, making sure they don't go to 32, but they still stay within 27, 28, 29. That doesn't mean that the class ratio will be there, that it's more around 25 as opposed to 23. So on average, right? But some of the classes that had 23 or 24 students will have 27, 28, or 29 students.
Thank you. That's clear.
Okay, I have a question about student mental health and well-being. We know mental health is a going concern. What will be the impact of a loss of 2 child youth counselors? How can we correct for that, for the removal of those 2 positions?
So in terms of the child and youth counselors, as I mentioned, it's a shift in practice and the workload. The social workers are more involved with our elementary students. So we're actually asking for an additional social worker. And the reduction of 2 child and youth counselors also reflects the fact that we've had 2 years of reduction of enrollment decline in elementary panel as well. So it's a bit of a shift in the service required, but also adjustment for enrollment.
And if I may just add quickly, part of that shift is what we have also heard from the schools in terms of what they prefer in the service of social workers in meeting the needs of students. So that was part of the thinking behind that as well.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm happy to hear that we will be able to support all students as needed. Thank you. No more questions on this slide, so Roxana, go ahead.
All right, so on the same trend of looking for savings and efficiencies, we are not done yet. We still have to hear from the stakeholders. So as I mentioned, we are reviewing and over the next couple of weeks the survey results. And we have a good summary of what we've heard from staffing and SEAC and PIC so far. We are continuing our efficiency reviews. Transportation cannot be completed until about May because we do need students, locations, programs, all of that information to be put in before we can do an efficiency review. So that is going to be coming in a couple of months. We are looking at professional development release time and how it can be used more appropriately and whether there are savings in that budget line. We're pending some funding sources, so we still need to look for supports for student funds. As I mentioned, we're not receiving them for the OCTU union, but we don't know whether the EAs will be receiving. We're one of the 5 boards that have EAs in a separate union that are still negotiating centrally. So we don't know whether or not we will be receiving that funding. And we have 24 staff currently allocated towards this funding. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, the priority with the reductions has been to minimize impact on students, and to do so has been to maintain the level of service for our EAs. So we are looking through savings to prioritize maintaining these positions should the funding not continue. There's also some additional one-time funding priorities and partnership funds that are associated to 36 positions currently in our system, but those were every year. This isn't different than a regular year when we have these one-time funding and they change from year to year, but in particular they have 36 positions that looks at math transitions and the streaming. Other areas, of course, we're going to see if we have to take into account anything else within our operating budgets, what else we need to look at, depending on the GSN or the grants release, and whether or not there will be an impact or an increase due to inflation and just keeping up with costs and cost pressures. So we are not sure whether or not this is sufficient, too much, or too little in terms of identify savings and reductions. It's just based on what we currently have, the information we currently have. So now we're moving on to proposed additions. As I mentioned before, there's still needs for certain things that we have to add, and these are permanent additions. We also have one-time additions, which will be on a further slide, and that will be the one to request approval from the ministry to use through reserves. But this one are proposed additions that are permanent, so therefore we've identified savings on the previous slide in order to make room for these. Some of them do have some additional funding that was announced. So we just wanted to highlight them here in terms of what we identified or savings to put them through. So we're proposing to increase our contingency from $500,000 to $1 million next year because there's a number of things that we don't know. Whether inflation will be factored into the funding compared to the cost pressures to pay our bills and contractors, whether the interest rate will go down and have a bigger impact on our investment income, which it's around $3 million this year, could be $1.5 million next year. So it could be a big difference depending on the interest rate, depending on the cash position. There's a couple of support for student funds that are not yet finalized or confirmed. So all of these may not be confirmed in time for June. So we would recommend to have a contingency up to $1 million. Cybersecurity initiatives, we are looking at a permanent increase of 467. That's to keep up with the licensing that we are required in order to also meet our commitments that have been outlined by the ministry and our insurance provider. And we're looking at a few additional staff. Colette mentioned the structured reading coaches, which we're looking to add 3 and to add an IPL, instruction program lead, for structured reading. So that's 4 positions that will continue the work of the 8 that we are considering on the reduction list. Another instruction program lead for our program services that is being proposed as a result of reducing from e-learning, and that reduction on e-learning is the work is shifting more to the schools that are providing that method of learning, and the program lead will be supporting the schools. Social worker, we've talked about that, the need to change and more, be more responsive to elementary students. There's a need for a new communication web design. Currently is hosted internally, and it's coming end of life, so we have to look at the hosted solution. So that is something that we'll have to take on, and just to focus on our communication strategy. And the specialized behavior support worker would be the other proposed addition, and that is within special education. So maybe I'll stop there if there's questions. No, we'll keep going. Oh.
Thank you. Through the chair. Regarding the communications strategy and website redesign, I understand what website redesign means. What is meant by communication strategy?
Absolutely. So we're looking at the consistent look and feel and update to school websites as well. There's a lot going on in terms of communication and engagement. So it's just the work that is behind that particular area.
Heather,
I'm sure Heather wants to comment more.
Sure, thanks. So as Superintendent Nagoy mentioned, our software that houses the hdsb.ca and myhdsb, our staff intranet, is coming to its end of life in 2026. So we do need a new solution. We also need a solution that we can host off the premises as well, for security reasons, and also just to ensure stability in our communications channels. We also know that our website is a core function of our overall communication strategy. It's the first place people look when they want to find information out about schools and HDSB. So we want a more centralized, consistent approach across school sites, HDSB, and our staff intranet, so that we can further support our communication strategy and goals through a cohesive, up-to-date, and way that accommodates our current branding and accessibility standards.
Robbie.
Just to clarify then, the cost here and the reason it's listed in this slide as opposed to the next one is a permanent cost. It's not the cost of redesigning, it's the cost of permanent hosting and change in software solution. Is that correct?
The annual fee for hosting would be not, like, this is an initial fee for the redesign, and then the fee for annually would be less than that.
This is the annual hosting as well as AODA and everything else. There is a next slide. You're right. The next slide has the implementation cost. The one-time implementation cost is on the next slide.
I thought I just heard.
This is the annual. So this is the annual hosting of the website. And the AODA compliance and everything else that comes with it, and the school websites, et cetera.
Thank you.
Okay, Margot?
Yeah, and mine's another kind of question of clarification. So what I'm assuming this is you, Heather, this will be done in concert with Jonathan. So because Jonathan's doing the cybersecurity thing and you're doing new stuff, I'm assuming that will have some overlap and some communication so that they are working together rather than creating more jobs for there.
The website strategy is a joint project between information services and communications, yes.
All right, so that brings us to the one time. So there is a need to cybersecurity initiatives for, there's a plan, part of our strategic plan that we've also submitted to the ministry for almost $1 million in order to bring everything up to the required or the proposed levels. As Sari mentioned earlier, all of the reductions in staffing that have been identified and that you will see on the overall staffing slide, which includes enrollment decline and all that, are through attrition. So we do our best to always look at making those changes through attrition. Because there's a new protective complement for some of the groups, this in particular, our secretarial school admin group, we're just putting a placeholder here, not knowing how many retirements we have in 1 year compared to what we end up identifying as reductions. The early reading kits, you've seen the one time, which was close to 400, that we are reducing it under savings. If the ministry would allow us, we would want to continue a $250,000 investment so that we can top up some of our schools, especially from an equity perspective, those schools that are smaller and they need some additional kits. So that's why this is here, but it's taken off as a permanent budget pressure. And then the communication one-time implementation cost for the communication website, I should say communication, the board website and school website, the redesign and implementation cost. It's an estimate. It could be less. It could be more. I think we had a range of 150 to 250 maybe. So we just sort of went down the middle for now. Again, one time for the implementation cost. This is what is presented to the ministry for approval. So that's what we would be asking for, to use our board reserves. You'll notice that the 24 educational assistants are not on here. Initially, we were contemplating to, if the SSF funding doesn't continue, to continue them through a request through the in-year deficit elimination plan. However, what happens if the ministry does not give us approval until August? We need to have the allocations to schools done in April. So we've made everything we could to identify savings and efficiencies and move things around to be able to absorb those if we need to. Still hopeful that the SSF will continue, since outside of the 5 school boards, the rest of the province have received them because they were part of the QP negotiation, and they have received SSF funding for EAs under that. So we're hopeful that will be the case here, and that might give us a bit of a wiggle room in the rest of the budget. So I'll stop there in case there are questions.
There are 2 questions, Margot and Jean.
Yeah, so mine just, because I don't quite understand, I just want a little bit of understanding. What is the placeholder for upcoming, what is $360,000 for upcoming retirements? Just if you could explain that for me, please.
Through you, Vice Chair Oliver, to Trustee Shuttleworth. So as we mentioned 2 or 3 slides ago, we're looking at fine-tuning our OCTO staffing model, where we allocate our secretarial staff, and those allocations are determined by enrollment. And so in order to do that and satisfy under our obligations under the collective agreement, we can't simply reduce staff without positions being vacant. In other words, unless there's a retirement or resignation, this streamlining or right sizing of these allocations could not occur. So in this case, we're saying we're banking on reductions of $360,000. However, they're not guaranteed. There's a placeholder for that, and that all depends on the rate of attrition. So if we don't have any attrition for the next, I don't know, forever, then those $360,000 will not be realized in savings. So they're not true savings in the sense that we haven't acted on them. But if there's a retirement or resignation, then there's an opportunity to realize some of those savings. It could be $50,000, it could be another $100,000, and so on and so forth. So if we get 8 retirements in 1 year, that's roughly $360,000, but we don't anticipate we'll get that.
So is it a cost?
Could I give that a shot?
Yes, Robbie.
So the budget is for a reduction of 8 positions at $480,000. What we're saying in this slide is we're only counting on 2 people actually retiring. There's a possibility that if only 2 people retire, we've still got to eat another $360,000 of cost next year, because we still have 6 people that we have to pay for that year. So it appears in both places. Up front, it says there's a reduction of 8 positions, and here permanently. And here we're saying, but if we don't get 8 retirements in time, we'll pay these people.
Thank you. Thank you.
He's hired.
I'll be leaving now.
Yes.
All right, Jean.
Thank you very much. I just want to go up to the first line, cybersecurity initiatives. We know the importance of this, a huge importance. We see it daily in the news of different areas that have had issues. So I just want to know, have we really, or have boards really expressed to the government that this needs to be like maybe a new line or a new bunch of monies coming into the school boards? Because this is becoming increasingly expensive. And I just wonder if we've got a recognition by the province of this large cost now starting to build, and are they going to in fact fund it?
Thank you for that question, Jean. Certainly, we have put forward that we do need the funding. The ministry does provide us with funding on an annual basis, and we have, as a board, have not always utilized all those funds. So that has sort of put us in a position where we really need to catch up. And so, but I've advocated, Roxana has, Jonathan has, so we've all done that work. But I'll turn it over to Jonathan to give some more depth to that.
Yeah, thank you. So just as a further commentary, the issue, they have been pretty good about seed money for pilots and getting things up to a standard. Probably not as comprehensively as we're going to need. We had a meeting just yesterday about moving to SASE, and it was sort of eye-watering the amount of money we're going to have to find from other sources. So, but they do seed some money. The issue for us, honestly, will be the ongoing funding, the sustainability of this. So it's great to get these things up and running. We're up to date for 2024, 2025, but what about 2028, 2029? Is the funding going to continue rolling in from the province for years out, because this isn't going to go away. It's not like we just, we implement this, change this, update that, move to the cloud, and we're done and dusted, and there's going to be ongoing costs. And funding those ongoing costs is a significant commitment for any board. It's going to be a struggle. And the province has recognized this is a need, but needs to come up with the sustained funding over time to not, the ministry refers to it as cyber rails, let you stay on track, and otherwise you go back to how things were. Well, we need their support to stay on track, on the rails, right?
So just follow up. With this type of investment, I have to think that we are reducing risks to our system. And in reducing risks, does that help us with any costs that we would have with insurance that we pay? In other words, efficiencies on insurance. I mean, and maybe that's a simplified thought, but does that happen when we invest so willingly to avoid risk?
May I start? Thank you for that question. The premise and hypothesis that you've laid out sounds very good and plausible. The challenge is that Jonathan will tell you and Roxana will tell you that our insurers it's a moving target, and so we have done more than we've ever done, and we still need to do more than we ever have, and so it just keeps moving away from us. So you are right. And I don't know if Roxana could speak to the insurance cost piece, but it's just a moving target that we keep chasing.
I can also just add to that, and Roxana can chime in after. If you think of, I don't know if you own a home or know people who own homes in like Florida, someplace where hurricanes hit or floods hit on a regular basis, and over time the insurance goes up, or it's tougher to get the insurance, but the payouts also start to decline, right? Because the insurance companies are paying out more. So as cyber attacks continue to target boards, and insurance is paying out more, the amount they're paying out has decreased. So as the director has said, we're doing more. The goalposts keep moving to maintain the coverage, but the coverage has actually dropped. It's hard. It's tougher. It's much tougher now to reach a higher level of coverage than 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So I'm not sure if Roxana wants to comment on that further.
Okay. I have nothing further to that to add. Yes, so we're not saving money. We're just maintaining our coverage. So if there's no other questions, this would be what we are at this point proposing to go forward. We'll inform the ministry just so they know, and as we update it, they will be provided updates as well. I've got too many mice on my desk. So just this is an overall proposed staffing overview. We've talked about the proposed savings and additions, and now there's one column there that will show you any changes in terms of enrollment or the funding stopped, things like that. So the overall reduction in staffing, when you add those three columns in the middle, are 114 FTEs. Again, through attrition, that has been our main goal, and a portion of it is some funding that hasn't been yet announced, and some is part of enrollment decline and staffing ratios. I'm not sure if there's any question. Oh, and also taking into account the Milton 12 increase and an additional principal, et cetera. So staffing and caretakers and what comes with the new school. So that is just the overview on staffing. Sorry, questions? Oh. As I mentioned, we are still looking at other considerations to contain or reduce costs or increase revenues. We're looking at rental revenue increases in terms of utilization as well as rates. We've talked about this, I think, in January. I think it was January. We are proposing a 5% increase in our rental rates. And promoting community use of our spaces, working with partners. We're looking at the enrollment for some programs for international students to attract more international students, but we've also proposed an increase in the tuition fees for international students, maximizing investment revenue, which will be limited by the interest rates if they start to decline, and student retention trends, reviewing that and having strategies to retain and attract more students as we go forward. That, however, is more of a long-term strategy and not necessarily something immediate. And then containing costs, looking at restricting empty spaces, duplication of services, student transportation, as well as talking to our vendors about bundling services, reviewing the scope of work if we can find additional efficiency. So all of that is happening in the background as well. And last but not least, these are the upcoming dates. Stakeholder feedback on April 3rd. Provincial budget is set to be tabled on March 26th, so we're waiting the release of the GSN thereafter. So last year was about 2 weeks out, so potentially by mid-April, and then we will be circling back with SEAC and the board in May. And Jay and myself would be happy to take any other questions.
Are there other questions for our speakers? Tanya?
In the last item there, it says draft budget at BOY, May 15th. What's BOY?
BOT.
Typo. Oh, so, okay. So that's Board of Trustees?
Board of Trustees.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you very much, Roxana and Jay, for this presentation and for joining us tonight. Thank you. And thank you, Colette, for fielding questions. And sorry, and Heather, and Jonathan. Thank you all. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 3.0, which is the consent agenda. And we have 3 items. We have the approval of the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting from February 21st, 24. And for receipt of information items, we have 2. We have the inclement weather procedures admin procedure, and we have the school councils and parent involvement council admin procedure. So I'll put the motion on the floor. Be it resolved that the Board of Trustees approve the consent agenda action items and receive the information items as listed on the March 20th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting agenda. Trustee Gray, would you like to move the motion to deal with the consent agenda?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. Are there any items that need to be pulled for discussion? Okay, I see Tanya.
Yes, my question through you, Chair, is actually what I'd like to pull is the school councils and parent involvement AP. And that is, does anyone else want to pull anything or?
Nothing else? Okay.
No. Okay. So my question is when I look at the AP, I see procedure for principals to follow when it has to do with school councils. But when it comes to parent involvement committee, I find it a little vague, especially if there's a parent who's going to look at this, that it talks about the parent involvement committee as a regional committee. When I read the word regional, to me, I read that as a Halton committee, not necessarily a school board committee. And parent involvement committee is a staff-led committee, and there are annual, or how do you say every 2 years, biannual? I'm not sure. Applications to be on this committee. And I'm not seeing any reference to that here. So my only concern is if a parent is reading this and wants to learn more about the parent involvement committee, it would be nice if we could provide a little bit more detail here and perhaps include the terms of reference in on page 1, which in the cross-reference section, because there's a lot that goes into a parent involvement committee, and there's a lot of rules that need to be followed. And I know that a lot of parents don't quite understand the difference between a school council and this parent involvement committee. So it would be nice if we could provide it with the level of detail that it deserves. So that was my comment.
Tara, did you want to respond or ask any clarifying questions?
No, I'm happy to respond, and thank you for that. So what I'm hearing, I appreciate the comment and the query around how we position our parent involvement committee and the interest and needs of families to understand with greater clarity in terms of what it represents, and again, some potentially supporting items around that. So what I'm hearing is changing the language around a regional committee to articulate it, not a regional, but rather a school board committee, and also identifying in the terms of reference, or rather in terms of the cross-reference documents, the terms of reference for the parent involvement committee would be advantageous. So I can certainly move forward with that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I add one more thing? This is not to any AP in particular, but to all APs in general, that I find there's a discrepancy in language from AP to AP. So for example, sometimes in APs, we refer to parents. Other times we refer them as parent/guardians. Other times it's parent/caregiver/guardian. So my only request is when these APs are being updated, if language could be made consistent, maybe perhaps develop some sort of protocol where language standards. So if we refer to the school board as school board, then it should be referred to school board on all APs. If we refer to parents as parent/guardian, it should be consistent across all APs. So that's not a comment on tonight's APs, but to all APs that a level of consistency should be applied. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tanya. And we've certainly had that conversation, I think, as recently as last week on this very issue. So we do seek to bring some consistency to it, and we will certainly look to do that.
Okay, any other questions on the consent agenda?
So sorry, mine's just a follow-up to what Tanya was just saying, because we too at the university have been looking at this right now and being consistent and ensuring that the language that we use is accepted by greater boards. So like if, again, the parent caregiver piece, there's different, in my mind, there's different interpretations of what that means. So making sure that whatever wording we're using or whatever titles we're giving is consistent with educational policy and all that kind of stuff. So thank you.
All right, thank you for those comments. We're done with the consent agenda. I will ask you please to vote to accept. Show of hands. And Naveed. Okay, that passes. Ms. Lake.
Just point of clarification. So in committee of the whole, I didn't think we voted. So I'm just a little bit confused because there's no, just a question.
Could I offer some clarification? So, Margot, you're absolutely right. There are no formal motions in terms of adopting certain direction, but in committee of the whole, there could be informal motions of the nature to receive consent items or information items, or to approve minutes, or to adjourn, or to move into private session. So those sorts of administrative motions are in order in committee of the whole.
Okay, we'll move on to Item 4.0, discussion items, and we've got several. The first of which is order paper review, and I'll pass it over to Amy.
Thank you. I hope you've all had a chance to look at the order paper and noted the number of items that have been resolved since the last time we did this. If you look at the first couple of items that are still on the order paper, things like negotiations, property matters, negotiations, those items can't come off because the work has not yet been completed. But if we move to the next item, M220198, regarding the use of $990,000 from accumulated surplus, we did request an update on whether or not that money's been spent and whether or not it's ready to come off the order paper.
Oh, sorry.
Can you respond to that one?
I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were asking me a question. So you were asking about M221019. So this motion still needs to be on here. We have not exhausted these funds.
Thank you. Are there any questions from trustees regarding 0198? I see it, there's a speakers list and I'm confused because we're going through it in order.
Okay, not on this one.
So not on this one?
Do you want to take questions as you address a motion?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's clear the list. And as you hear the topic, then put your name on the list. Thank you.
So M230040 has been grayed out and is complete. Are there any questions regarding this item?
I don't see any.
Okay. M230064, this was regarding property matters and has not yet been completed. Are there any questions regarding this item?
I don't see any.
M230091, the first two paragraphs have been completed. The remaining paragraph is, be it further resolved that the multi-year plan foundational elements ad hoc committee be dissolved after completion of the strategies components. And I know that we have not yet completed that. We are going to have the crucial conversations PD later this spring. The next item is M230113, and this is for the Fix the Finances. And is that finished now? Okay. Yes, it did. You're right, it did. Okay, so that one can be grayed out for the next meeting. M230119, that is property matters, and the one following it is also property matters, and they are not yet complete and cannot be removed. And you will see that these are also appearing on the private session order paper. So if you're wondering exactly what it is they're referring to, when you go to the private session order paper, you will see all of the verbiage that was used when passing those private session motions. M230123 is proceeds of disposition in identified support of the multi-year plan. And I believe that has not yet been completed, but I would like to ask Director Ennis to respond to that one, 0123.
Still continuing.
Okay. M230124 is I believe, aligned with 0123. So it's probably also not complete.
Correct.
Okay. M230137, it resolved, approved the use of proceeds of disposition. Here we go again with proceeds of disposition. This is for the Glenview Gymnasium, and I know that is still ongoing.
Correct.
M230183, was respecting personnel matters and property matters. And that was two separate motions that came from private session on the same evening. And when we were going from Jean to Carolina, and we had Gail in the middle, and it should have shown up as two items. The personnel matter was us approving the director's performance review, so that one can be struck. The property matter has not yet been completed. So that, if there's any questions about that, please let me know now, because that shouldn't have been done that way. The next item is M24006. The first paragraph is done, and the second paragraph will come to committee of the whole next month. M24007 has been struck. Yes, we approved and authorized this plan. M24018.
This one's completed.
This one is complete. The first half is anyway. The second half is the ERA 127 and ERA 120 boundary review. So only the first paragraph is complete, right?
Yes.
Okay. The next two items were respecting negotiations, and they were both our memorandums of understanding with our federations. So they are both complete. Are there any other questions? I see. No, that's it. We're done.
All right, then, Jean. Thank you. My memory, if it serves me correctly, did we not, or were we not going to put a different title on order paper? We had a different term, I thought.
Yes, we have not determined that as a board yet, though. It's been something that I suggested because I was I made aware by Robbie that order paper is not what this is. And so, yes, we do have a suggested new title from Manager Khan, but we had not yet had that conversation as a board of trustees, and that is something that we do need to do. Yeah, I will add it to my next item. Yes. Okay.
So I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, so we'll move on to 4.2, which is governance, professional development recommendations, direction, and board self-assessment reflections. And we'll start first with the board self-assessment reflections. The board self-assessment subcommittee had selected 4 topic areas that we believe require some commentary or input from you to help us understand the issues and how we can collectively move forward and collaborate effectively. You will notice shortly I will post large sheets of paper around the room. Each topic is listed on the sheet in purple. In green, there is a set of prompting questions to help you think through that particular topic. You are invited to write your response and thoughts on the sheet directly, or there will be sticky notes that you can use and post on the appropriate sheet. We will spend about 15 minutes circulating around the room so you can make your way to each of the 4 areas. And after that, the committee will pull that feedback together, summarize, and we'll bring it back to you at a subsequent committee of the whole meeting. We will also share a Google Doc with all these questions for you after the meeting with a timeline that we have yet to determine so that you can spend some more time thinking about it. Because I know these things are, you need to sometimes have a little bit more time. So we will break out to do that shortly. And after that, we will resume with governance PD recommendations and direction. And I see Jean has a question.
Just wondering if there's a way for our online colleague to join in tonight.
Yes, I will send Naveed the Google Doc. And I think that's probably the best way for him to participate. And then you'll be able to also join that Google Doc later to add your comments as more things come to mind. So we will break out into our little work groups. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you everybody for participating. We are now going to move to part 2 of this sharing and reflections, and that's governance, PD recommendations and directions, and I'll pass it over to Amy.
Thank you. From our PD that we received from Marianne Thompson-Howell, there were a couple of takeaways that I think we need to discuss as a board, make sure that everyone's in sync with these recommendations. And I know some of them were a little bit controversial. The first one being whether or not administrative procedures should be coming in our board packages or even referenced in our board packages because they are operational and beyond the purview of trustees. And when we start to even have conversations about these items, sometimes we might be getting out of our lane. And I know that that took us aback a little bit when she made that observation. And so I want to open this one up for conversation because we really need to have a sense of where we want to go with that, how we want to handle that. And so I'm just going to open up the floor. Go ahead, Margot.
Thank you. And that to me also links quite nicely into the comment that I made about the next item on the agenda, which is titled Operational Guidelines, which, again, according to our training, arm's length. So I didn't understand why it was here. And I'm just, again, trying to get clarity as to where does it, like, why is it here? Why are we talking about operations if we have no purview?
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
It's on here. So yeah, if this is, sorry, Dean, if I could just quickly, but if this is what's come from the training, this question.
Because we haven't had the conversation yet, Margot.
Okay.
Okay, Jean.
Okay. The question being the admin procedures. Why would we include it in the agenda? Okay, thank you. I'll start all over again now. With the question of admin procedures and whether or not we would have it in the agenda or not, I really think there is a place for information, whether it's a place that we have the capacity or the permission or whether we should be even commenting on it, I'm not sure, but I find it very informative and helpful in my job to know of the APs. Now, could I not go on board and look them up and read them? I suppose I could, but when there are changes, I'd like to be aware of changes that are being made. That would be my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else with comments about this? Manager Khan. Oh, just a second. We do have another trustee. Can I put you at the end? Okay, Carol.
So this is included in the report that's coming later from the Professional Development Planning Standing Committee. The recommendation makes sense from a governance perspective, absolutely. It is unusual to review operational procedures and protocols at the board level because we are governance. However, our committee is suggesting that we have a follow-up to ask more questions about that recommendation. So if we could have another session with the provider to find out, because the recommendation came from looking at our agendas. So she sees the work we're doing. And so one of the questions I would have is, given what you're seeing and the conversation, and she, I think, watched our meetings. So given the conversations that you saw and the agendas, how would you suggest we operate differently such that we don't need to review the APs? So I think that's sort of where I was left, where the training was great. The suggestion makes sense, but the operational piece of actually removing that review makes sense really with proper training. Because what I've noticed, we do delve into operations probably inappropriately sometimes, but what we also do is look at APs and determine, are they correctly reflecting the policies that we put in place? And so it's just a check on that. So if there's another way to do that, then I would be open to it. But it did seem that we needed sort of a part 2 of that governance training.
Fair enough. Anyone else? Even if you want to say you agree or disagree and that's all you want to say. Oh, go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, thank you. So I like Carol's proposed approach to have a part two to that conversation. I'm a bit torn because, you know, we're hands off of operations, but when I do see a proposed update to an AP, I do want to ensure that it's correctly reflecting our policies, because I know there have been instances in the past where our policies are not being correctly reflected in APs, and that's a problem. So who's ensuring that our policies are properly being reflected in APs? So maybe that's a question for Marian. And the other thing, for example, just something that happened tonight is when you have someone who's not in operations read the AP, they can see things from a different perspective. And perhaps we offer that lens from a parent perspective, someone from a governance perspective, and saying, well, how about X, Y, and Z? Have they been considered? So I see our role as perhaps what's missing, how can it be made better, but in compliance with our policies, versus dictating what should and should not be done within the procedure. So there's a fine balance.
Definitely a balancing act to be had there. Robbie or Kelly, anything to add? Robbie.
My initial reaction to this suggestion is positive, with caveats and with all of that. I definitely agree. I would like that part two conversation. Talk us through the ramifications of this, and move into. I think Carol was getting at it. If we let go of watching updates to policy, where does that attention need to go, and how do we ensure that we are watching the things that we need to be watching to ensure that the board is delivering on policy and on the goals of student achievement and well-being?
Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else to speak on this. Did you want to add anything, Joanna? No? Okay. It sounds like we're pretty much agreed that we would like to delve deeper. And so I know we're going to be getting a report in just a few minutes, so I'll leave it for that report. Tanya, go ahead.
Sorry, one last thought. I like what we did tonight, where we didn't have someone speak to every update in the AP. It was, which one do you want to discuss? So that also afforded us more time. We got through it quicker. So if we are going to consider keeping them, perhaps we only pull the ones we want to discuss and not go through each one individually.
All right. So we will leave that to the later report this evening. The other thing that Marian commented on was our trustee comments and questions. And she said that that was a dangerous thing to have because it could lend us to going into the other lane. And so I would like to know your views on that. I'm going to reset the speaker's queue. So if anyone would like to speak to that, thoughts around it, I believe that could be the chair's role to control, to ensure that we don't go into the wrong lane. But I'd like to hear if you have any suggestions. Kelly.
I think it's actually an important part of the agenda because this gives you the opportunity to maybe raise a concern about something in your own community, or to highlight something that's happened that's significant to the board, in different ways. And you don't get those opportunities in other places. So, I mean, that's part of our role as a trustee, is to make sure that we bring concerns or other things to the board. And we don't have the vehicle if we don't have something like that on the agenda.
And Jean.
Ditto on what Kelly just said. Thank you.
Wait.
I am mindful of the warning that came with it, that it is an element of our agenda as it exists that could be weaponized. And that we don't, this is, you know, the reality of a school board is we are elected. We're not going out to seek particular people to fill vacancies. People are being voted in. We don't control who's going to be around the table. And there is, in my risk management hat, I see an element of risk in leaving that item on the agenda, and I hear very much the perspective of how it is being used constructively presently. And I wonder how to address that. And I this is conversation part 2. This is stuff I would love to pick up and continue to run with.
Thank you, Joanna.
Yes, so I do generally like this portion of the agenda for the reasons that my colleagues outlined. And in terms of mitigating the risk, I'm wondering if maybe we want to set some loose parameters that will provide a guideline. We won't be able to consider everything, but I think we can consider the big kind of risky things that we don't want to talk about or that are not appropriate to be raised in this venue. So we could come up with some criteria, for example, you know, highlighting a school event, a community event, or bringing a question from the community that's relevant to the work that's going on. Some thoughts.
Thanks, Joanna. And back to Carol.
So there's different ways of using it for sure. I haven't seen it abused yet, but absolutely agree, Robbie, it could be. And I suspect that was the concern, is that we are having governance training about the way we do things to move into the future. So beyond this board and beyond the people we're sitting with. It does probably from the outside seem like a dangerous thing to have on the agenda where anybody can say anything. I think it was pointed out that oftentimes the questions asked have been heads up have been given to staff that the question's coming. But again, we do that as a courtesy that all of us around the table do. So I do see the danger in it. I know in other boards, there are different ways to bring issues, different ways to ensure that there's full participation and equity in participation. And one way is to add items to the agenda. So members of the board can reach out to the chair and request that an item be added to the agenda so that everyone knows it's coming and it's appropriate. So it would be a question that is related to a public issue that is in our realm as trustees to respond to and in the realm of governance. So that's just another way that I think the kind of same purpose is achieved. But again, would love to have a further discussion with Marion about that.
And we'll go to Manager Khan.
I just wanted to provide perhaps something to consider. So the recommendation around having an open question and answer period in any sort of board meeting or council meeting, that's around the concern of these are public meetings. And so a properly constituted meeting requires notice to the public about the items that are going to be on the agenda. If trustee questions and comments bring up concerns or items that advance business or bring up substantive items, proper notice has not been served to the public that item was going to be addressed. The public doesn't have an opportunity to delegate. And and really probably there hasn't been proper preparation from the respective parties to be able to speak to that item. So that's really the concern around having an open question and answer period. However, the way different legislative bodies get around that, and to Kelly's point, is that it is really great for the purposes of making announcements, right? You are public figures, you're out in the community, and there's lots of great things that you want to share through that public meeting. And so though that item on the agenda is often just named announcements. And so that is the simple parameter that's based around it. And then trustees have an ability to make all of those good recommendations or announcements to the public, but it keeps it on track and it doesn't veer into areas where substantive business is moved and proper notice has not been served to the public. So that's really the consideration around not having open question period.
Thank you for that explanation, Manager Khan. That really, that made a lot of sense to me. I'm wondering if we could think about this, and I know that not all trustees are present right now, but if we could think about this and consider whether we want to change this from trustee comments and questions to announcements. And that way we would circumvent the issue, but perhaps we could think about that in terms of having Marian come back, have the conversation with her and get her opinion on this. And in the meantime, perhaps if we could have a friendly agreement that we will use it for announcements. And I'd love to hear any comments about that idea.
Jean?
I can remember a term ago, or maybe it was my first term, where this part of the agenda became a clearinghouse for everything from hopscotch contests to this, that, and the other in schools. And it went on and on and on and on and on. And so I wonder if we would define what announcements could look like or what is significant. Example, next week is a skills competition at Georgetown High School, and there will be great things to come out of that. So that to me is, it's big, it's important, and maybe that doesn't, as much as it's important, all these other things that I just don't, this board has too many great and positive things happening every day. How do we begin to honor all and not forget about something, but make it meaningful enough for this meeting in the context that we have?
Okay, I'm not seeing any other speakers to this. I think perhaps this is a really good thing for us to be bringing to Marian. So that clears that item. The last item was the name of our order paper. And when I asked Manager Khan if there was a formal name for this animal, she said no. And she said what she would call it was outstanding actionable motions. And so this is something that, again, I would like everyone to think about. I'd like to hear your comments on. And if there's no objection, we might look at changing that, but that's a change to the bylaw. So that would come to board again for that, but we wouldn't bring just that to come to board. So any comments about the use of the title outstanding actionable motions? Tanya.
I'd simplify it. Outstanding motions, because everything on there is actionable. So it's just a repetition. Motion means action has to be taken. So outstanding motions.
That is a great point. Every motion does have an action, but it doesn't have a future action. So for example, you pass a motion to approve an agenda. The action on that motion is complete. And so this is just getting at the fact that it's a future actionable item, and to get away from just creating an index of every motion that's ever been passed. So it's just creating more accurate language that way, but I get your point that simplicity is always better. So there definitely could be better terms, but that was just the thinking around that.
Okay, sorry, just to follow up. And I understand what you're saying, and that's a great point. But when I look at the report, we don't see the motions for approving the agenda or for approving minutes. The list right now is only items that are outstanding. So that was my thinking, in that only outstanding items are showing up on the list. So that's why I suggested removing that extra verbiage.
Okay. I'll send something out in my weekly update to trustees and just ask for opinions across the Board of Trustees. As we know, we don't have everyone here tonight. I don't want us to make any kind of decision here tonight anyway, but wanting just to make sure we're going in the right direction. And Robbie.
If we're done with this topic, you had said finally, and there was one more piece of Marion's presentation that I think was salient, and that was how we consider using our multi-year plan to frame our meetings. And she had one suggestion that's not in our scope, which is the director's report might set up that way. What might be in our scope is where the director's report falls within the agenda, the standard agenda, and so her recommendation was to bump it up. I would love to hear, Curtis, what your perspective on that recommendation was, and how we might go from there.
No, thanks for that, Robbie. I mean, if I recall the conversation, I raised some concern that what I was hearing suggested an operational plan, that the directors basically bring in an operational plan at every meeting. And that was my concern. So, was we already bring an operational plan to the board, be it on with less frequency. So is that a duplication of work? If I were to bring a multi-year plan, focus areas each month, or does it not, the director's report not have to cover all areas of the multi-year plan every month, and maybe focus on one? Things to think about.
I'm wondering if this might too be one of those things that we need to delve deeper in with Marion. Yeah. Okay. Seeing no one else on the speakers list, I think we're done with this item. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. And we'll move on to item 4.3, operational guidelines. This item was requested from within the Board of Trustees to be brought forward for, I guess, a presentation from staff to help us understand the difference or the instances where there may be a need to create an operational guideline and what that means in the implementation of it in the school. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Certainly this conversation arose, I think, primarily out of the operational guidelines for student protest. And one of the things that we recognize in looking at the history of this particular guideline is that since it was created, I believe it was in 2019, we have revised it in some form or manner about 60 times, 60. That's an awful lot of changes. So operational guidelines are developed from time to time to provide timely operational guidance to system leaders regarding various matters that have arisen that we don't have a procedure for, and we want to provide guidance to staff. They're often updated over time as feedback is received to ensure we provide robust guidance that supports staff. This is not a new practice. Of course, this has been in place for many, many years. The purpose of having such operational guidelines is to provide prompt guidance, as well as to have flexibility to amend the operational practices and procedure and processes as deemed necessary in a timely manner, as I referenced at the start in my preface, 60 times since 2019. In speaking with legal counsel on this matter, it was suggested that for guidelines that are deemed to have permanency, So that perhaps speaks to the intent around why we were having the conversation, that we should perhaps think about converting such guidelines into procedures. Such evaluations could probably, this is just a recommendation, take place at the end of a school year, if it's determined that the guideline has been fully established and entrenched and requires some form of permanency. Something that relates to what we have we've been talking about earlier, the board's policy and procedure framework outlines that procedures which apply to administrative and/or operational activities must be approved by the director and provided to trustees for information. Currently, the AP process is not implemented in accordance with the board's policy and procedure framework. As before an AP is finalized, it is reviewed and discussed at committee of the whole, followed by a final presentation at a subsequent board meeting. Though the board is not passing a motion to formally approve APs, it is, in practical terms, serving as a review and an approval function. So that speaks to some of the conversation that was happening earlier about what is the purpose of the AP at the board meeting and what is the role of trustees in adjudicating these APs. So this process is rather lengthy, does not support the operational flexibility that guidelines require, and the sort of efficiency that we need in order to provide system administrators with the kind of guidance they need in a very quick, rapid, and timely manner. So we would recommend, similar to the conversation that was just had in 4.2, excuse me, that the AP review and approval process would be most effective if it lived outside of the committee of the whole and board framework, while maintaining a mechanism for trustees to provide feedback to what was mentioned earlier in updating the process of AP. So what that looks like, how it operationalizes in terms of the timeliness of your feedback, how you do that, the mechanism and modality through which we do that is to be determined. But we think that it would be best served if we were to still maintain the flexibility and the ability to respond quickly to ever-evolving situations. When you think about the current guideline that brought us to this conversation, we've had to be rapidly thinking about how are we changing it, how are we being responsive to it, how are we, so if we were to go through the committee of the whole board process, it would take weeks, if not months, before we could actually provide school and system administrators with the kind of guidance they need in a moment's notice. So that's basically the reason and rationale behind guidelines, and I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Okay, Tanya?
Through the chair, I'm utterly confused. Can you provide an example of a guideline so that I can frame what you said into guideline versus AP, just so I can get my head straight?
The protest guideline.
Okay, did you say that?
I did.
Okay, I missed that. Let me have that conversation in my head by myself now. Okay.
All right, Carol?
Thank you. So full disclosure, it was me that asked for this item, so I appreciate it. Just a little bit of context for trustees who are wondering why it was there. I think it relates a little bit to the conversation we just had about APs. So as a board, we set policies and we have sort of philosophies around public education and what this board stands for. And the operationalization of that comes through APs, which the public can see. So around now I don't know if there's any other guidelines because guidelines are not something that are public. And so when the protest started in our board, I was receiving questions asking me from parents and members of the public who had read all of our policies and our procedures. And they asked me, how does what's happening in the schools fit with our policies and procedures? And I didn't have an answer to that question. But I did learn through a notification email from the superintendent for my area that Director Ennis had replied to and mentioned that there were guidelines and that principals should be reminded to check those guidelines. So when trustees asked to see them was the first time we knew that they existed. The protest guidelines specifically directed principals to meet with protest organizers, help them to determine a space on property where the protest could happen. That kind of work was directed for principals to do. And this was not something that I was aware of as a trustee because, again, this is not public. So the concerns that I was hearing and that I share is that these guideline documents that we have now that were provided by staff were undated, not referenced to any available policies or procedures like our other ones were, and dealt with an issue in which students were concerned about something and wanted to discuss it, or they wanted to bring it into the knowledge of everyone around them. Conversations about world events and issues that students are concerned about can happen in classrooms, and I know they do, with the guidance of trained educators who can correct any misinformation that students might have from social media or peers and help facilitate respectful and productive conversations. The protests, I didn't feel, from what I observed in our high schools, were accomplishing that. So the concern was just, where did the theory or the philosophy that students should be able to say what they like via the avenue of protests, why was that considered beneficial to the system and to the students versus facilitated conversations to help support students who were legitimately upset and continue to be about what's happening in other part of the world. Just one quick note, I was at LC McGill last year for the PIC conference, and I noticed all the classrooms had little signs in them that said, this is a safe space. All opinions are welcome, so long as these opinions do not infringe upon anyone's human rights. Any form of discrimination will not be tolerated, and that was in every classroom. And to me, that indicated that that high school facilitates conversation in the way that I think we expect would be happening. So my question, I guess, around these guidelines, and I think you're saying that there's others that we're not aware of, is in the context of a public school board, how or why was it deemed necessary for students to speak out against any issue they believe is critical to them in this form, as opposed to those facilitated conversations that would normally happen in a classroom? So sort of what was the origin of having protest guidelines as opposed to supporting students to have respectful, productive, guided conversations to share what's important to them?
So I can't speak to the origin of the guidelines because they predate me, but certainly, students, I would imagine, have been exercising, their charter rights to protest. And so that, I think, is the bedrock of that particular action. Students who may or may not tell us that they are going to protest, we were trying to find ways, because administrators were asking, help us, help students who would say, this issue is important to us and we want to protest. And so the guidelines were developed, I would imagine, initially, not having nothing to do with what's going on this year. Tina, you want to add some more context to that?
Yeah, and I believe it was in 2019 students began to protest, and I believe it was around environmental issues, and that's when the original guidelines were developed because administrators were looking for guidance because we didn't experience protests prior to that.
Right. So it's, the students are not being given an avenue to protest. The students are choosing to protest. And so we are providing guidelines. We have many guidelines. We have guidelines around coyotes. We have guidelines around drones, guidelines around e-waste. We have all kinds of guidelines that we, they're not substantive enough for a procedure, but just words of how administrators can handle and manage certain situations. So I don't want to speak specifically to protest, I thought the big question that was being asked really was why do we have guidelines? Why do we have APs? Why do we have policies? Right, like the sort of the linkage between those. And so, what we are coming to in an understanding of guidelines are necessary for the flexibility and the operation of schools, for the safety of students, and if we deem them to be substantive and permanent, then we can convert them to APs. That's something that we are looking to establish. But so I'm answering the question of not protesters, but guidelines, and why do we have them?
Oh, done? Okay. Robbie.
Thanks. The conversation has moved from when I put myself on the list, but I'm curious about this question, and you were starting to touch on it, Curtis, in what's, I guess, formalizing what the distinction between a guideline and an AP is. So could you just tell us a little bit more about where you are in that process and what our pathway is to seeing a little more clarity between this is what this is, this is what this is?
So this is a relatively new conversation because we have become, I would say, very satisfied with the guidelines as we have them. Not until the question was asked, really, about why, Carol, why do we have guidelines as opposed to an AP, that we start to really contemplate. If it's a guideline that seems to be heavily used, one that requires that is substantive enough, then perhaps we need to think about how do we transport that into an AP. We haven't embarked on that yet, but we're thinking about perhaps at the end of every school year, looking at those guidelines that we have and seeing perhaps this is something that needs to be a more permanent fixture and a publicly facing document that we would then put on our website for parents and community. But in sort of the working of machinations of the day-to-day on the ground, it's really just for the administrators to manage the situation. So that's where we are.
Okay, Tanya.
So I had that conversation with my head, and it all made sense. But one thing you mentioned, Director Ennis, was that the board procedures have to come to committee of the whole, and then they have to come to board meeting for approval. But board procedures don't require our approval. So the only person that needs to approve an administrative procedure is yourself, and they only come to us for information. So I just wanted to clarify that we do not approve procedures. You do.
No, agreed. I think maybe it's the way we had been operating is sort of a tacit approval. So it's, and it's to the very conversation that we were having prior about what do we do with these procedures and how do we as trustees continue to give input while recognizing that you're just receiving it for information.
All right, Carol.
So I think that's full circle and very helpful. So I guess, I agree very much that the issue with the existence of these guidelines was that we didn't know they existed. And the way that the first version was written that we received on November 14th, I see many places or saw many places in it where there was no proper compliance with our mandate to provide inclusive schools with positive school climate. So if that had been an AP, we would have seen that already, and we would have been able to flag that and say, these guidelines around an environmental issue probably would not be of any concern. But when you think through what protests could be about, there is definitely potential for divisiveness and makes political protests for sure, difficult to manage in a school environment where we're also at the same time tasking our administrators to create positive school climates. And so like I said, when I saw the guidelines, I thought there's no way, there's like no principal can do this. This just won't work. When I think about all of the divisive issues that we've dealt with just in this boardroom since I was elected, when I envision anybody protesting on any side of any of those issues, I don't see a positive school climate. So I appreciate the work that you've done to look into it, and I definitely would agree that solidifying these types of guidelines into APs would facilitate some review to make sure that there's no, I guess, nothing out of compliance, basically, with the policies that makes it difficult for trustees to be able to say to the public, we are providing that welcoming, inclusive, positive school climate that you expect from us as a board. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to committee updates. Under standing committees, we've got an update from Governance Document Review Standing Committee. Over to you, Robbie.
Thank you. Very quickly to trustees, I wanted to let you know that we have a cycle of work that we've been starting with Manager Khan to look at the templates that we use, both for writing policy and for down the road, the reports that come to board. And so taking a look at those and asking if there are ways that we can clarify them to ensure that we're communicating the information that the board needs to hear. So that's that's on our workload, and expect it to come to board at a later date with some recommendations, and for discussion as well, obviously. And that's the key point there. Sorry, right, the other piece that was not explicitly on our list, but has percolated up from a lot of what Tanya was talking about is the question of a style guide, effectively, that says this is how we will keep consistent language across policies. And so that one's just arriving in my brain, and I have not discussed that with Manager Khan or Director Ennis about whether that's in scope for us.
All right, Tanya?
Yes, through the chair, to Robbie. Do you envision sharing your governance committee to-do list for the year? And I say that so that if there is something that you're planning on working on, so let's say you're going to make revisions to the bylaw, that there's already a list of what revisions are going to come up in case another trustee around the table has a suggestion, that you can slide it in there so that you can manage the work of the committee. So first question is there a to-do list for the year, the goal? And if there isn't, would you consider making one? And if a trustee does want to make a suggestion to a change in a policy or a bylaw, would your preference then be to have that come as a motion to get the work done, or would you prefer that to come via an email as a please and thank you?
Yes, there is a to-do list. It is linked in every one of our agendas, which are publicly on the committee's website, and I can send those the link along, since it's well, actually since you will have access to that anyway. One second question. My preference, and I will look to the other one committee member who is present, would be to receive that email that says, oh, I see you're going to be looking at X. Would you consider including this element as well? That would certainly be my preference.
All right, any other questions or comments on the topic? Seeing none, we'll move into an update from the Trustee Professional Development Committee. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you. So I have to apologize first for circulating this report on Monday when you should have had it earlier. March break messed with my my dates. If you haven't had a chance to review it, I have no problem just going through it quickly. Is that okay? So there's just a brief background. Does everyone have it? I shared it by email, but I could do it again. Or no.
Perhaps we should just ask if anyone has any questions about it.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
I can also reshare it really quickly if you want to take a look. So basically, the report talks about the governance training, which we've now discussed, and it gives a summary of the topics that were the most highly ranked by a majority of trustees from the survey that you completed. We had 100% participation, so thank you, everybody. And at the end, there is a list of proposed PD topics with an indication of whether the expectation is that they would be externally or internally facilitated. I can quickly share it. You found it? Okay. You got it? Okay, perfect. So as far as I'm aware, the next step, based on what happened last year, is that there was a motion that came to board that had a list of PD opportunities. The report and motion was approved with the expectation that there would be further detailed reports for final approval of the facilitators and associated costs if needed. So I was just planning on sort of copying what we did last March, actually. The motion was passed on March 22nd. So the intention was to bring a very similar motion on April 3rd, which is our next board meeting, with a list of PD topics, which are follow-up governance session, Indigenous education and perspectives, the Ontario Human Rights Code in education, human rights and equity, special education, and potentially cultural competence training. And that was actually one that I was hoping, since I got a few minutes on the agenda, to discuss. So cultural competence training was not part of the survey. It was suggested by, I think, one trustee. And I just wanted to get some feedback on whether anyone was interested in having the committee look into that. There were a couple of suggestions of local organizations that can provide that for us. So what I could do is look into it and then come back with some more information if there's some questions about it. But if it, does it pique the interest? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. So that wouldn't come in the report next week. It would be next week's, or sorry, 2 weeks, I guess. Report would be 5 topics that we would be looking at having this year for 2024. And as I indicated, some of them are external facilitations, so then further motions will be coming to approve the facilitator and the cost associated with that. So if there's any questions, happy to take them. And again, thank you to everyone for participating. It was a very efficient process, and I think we've got some great professional development planned for this year.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carol. Sounds like we have a good plan. I see a question from Robbie.
A handful of things. One, cultural competence I like. 2, in my write-in vote was for AI training. And just curious what the decision mechanism was to include some write-in votes and not others, and whether that's on the radar.
Yep, thank you for bringing that up. So that's the last section of the report, other topics. I should have touched on that. I'm sorry. That made it look like I picked some and ignored others. So artificial intelligence was suggested by multiple trustees, so thank you. The committee was informed that staff are currently examining different aspects of AI in public education, and that there is a report likely to come to board in the near future. And so the thinking of the committee was to allow that to happen and then determine what our needs would be specific to our roles to further explore the topic. The thinking was that it's a fairly new topic, I would say, for most of us, and we wanted to give staff an opportunity to provide the information that they're working on before determining what specifically trustees would need. That might not have been the direction you were going?
Yeah, no, sorry. We'll leave it there.
All right, I don't see anybody else on the list, so we'll move on to, I don't think there are any ad hoc committee updates. Are there any trustee questions and comments? Amy.
Thanks. I just wanted to remind trustees that there are a couple of draft letters that you are free to please provide your comments on. They are regarding the postings from the provincial government. The letters are due at the start of April, but I don't like to leave things to the last minute. So if you could just either give them a scan, a read, and let me know if I've missed the mark. Please don't worry about formatting and spelling. Just get to the content, please, and let me know if there's anything missing or anything that you'd like to add.
And Amy, you shared links to these letters by email?
In my last weekly update.
Okay, everybody, thank you. Margot.
Sorry. So, thank you. So I know that many of us here have been experiencing the same thing as I have over this last couple of days in receiving lots of emails and phone calls around the current renaming of Iroquois Ridge, as well as for me right now, some things around the land acknowledgement. And I'm really pleased to see that Gabby's here to give us some PD following this committee of the whole meeting. But my question is, I'm just wondering why this conversation is PD rather than a conversation in committee of the whole. Because I think that the public might benefit from our wonderful learning that we're going to have as well. So I asked the question earlier, but didn't receive a response.
Professional development is not a public item, and we've been given instruction that professional development ought not to be in a public meeting.
Right. So I'm just wondering if okay, that's all right. Thank you.
Carolina?
If I could just add to that. Also to the PD session that's occurring after Committee of the Whole is not to discuss the Iroquois Ridge renaming. It's really to talk about the broader way in which we engage our Indigenous partners. So that PD session is focused for the trustees. It's not meant to advance any business or have it be a discussion about any current renaming process. And that's the reason. That's part of the reason why it's separate from Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Carolina, for that clarification. All right, the agenda has now been exhausted. It is 8:47 p.m. and I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for great discussions and great meeting. Good night.